Hi ladies, and welcome back to my channel. This is Beth from Style at a Certain Age. And you might be wondering why I'm sporting the iconic pair of Wayfarers by Ray-Ban. Well, that's because today we are going to talk about a style or a look that is near and dear to my heart because it's a look that I reach for day in and day out. And that is the American classic style. So what is it? Well, in a nutshell, it's a timeless look, it's practically trend-proof, and it's equal parts tradition and casualness or comfort married with a little bit of rebelliousness, because at our heart, America was a nation founded on a rebellious spirit. I lived for many, many years overseas, and I was always referred as the Yank. And it's a term that I came to embrace because really what it meant was, we're free thinkers, and we're upstarts, and we're the ones that aren't afraid to say no. And that harkens back to when our country was founded way back in the 1700s, when the colonists banded together and they said no to King George III when he imposed a heavy taxation on the colonies. And that was in reaction to when the coffers were depleted over in England after a very long and lengthy war had been fought, the French Indian War. I'm a little bit of a history buff. So the French Indian War was fought from 1753, I could be wrong, but 1753 to 1764. And because of that war and all the expensive supplies that the king sent over, the coffers were depleted, the war chest was depleted over in England. So in order to replenish it, he decided to tax the colonies. And that's when a tiny band of men gathered together and they said no to the unfair taxes, no taxation without representation. And of course there are many other factors that factored into the Revolutionary War, but it was really gave birth to our nation, this notion of being able to say no. So with that rebellious spirit, you'll see some of these, especially the motorcycle jacket here, still to this day has a little bit of a rebellious spirit. And you'll see that through the decades with America. We aren't afraid to try something new, and we're not afraid to say no. So I rounded up my 6 favorites that are very iconic, I think, worldwide, and they're worn worldwide, but when you look at them, you will definitely think of America. And the first is, and that's what I was wearing in the opening segment, so this is the Wayfarers by Ray-Ban, the tortoiseshell ones, and they come in other colors, but this came into cult status when a president was elected way back in 1960, President John F. Kennedy, and President Kennedy was known to wear tortoiseshell sunglasses wherever he went, and someone mistakenly thought they were Wayfarers by Ray-Ban. And of course, Ray-Ban did not do anything to dissuade that myth, but come to find out, the tortoiseshell jackets that President Kennedy wore on an ongoing basis were American Optical and not Ray-Ban. But an urban legend was born, and Wayfarers came into prominence, and still to this day, you see musicians and artists and anybody that has that kind of classic, cool vibe, they sport a pair of Wayfarers. So definitely an American classic, worn worldwide. So that's my first item. The second item is blue jeans, and this really is our gift to the world. You're welcome. Of course, I didn't invent them, but it was an American company. They're still in existence today in San Francisco, Levi Strauss Company. But this harkens back to the gold rush in the 1800s, and a man by the name of Levi Strauss banded together with Jacob Davis, and the two men came together and they got a patent in, I believe it was 1873, with their invention, the mighty blue jean. And it was simply titled XX or double X until a few years later when they came and updated the dye lot. And the dye lot that they updated it to was called the 501 or the 501s that we still know today. So the American blue jean has given birth to many, many different blue jean companies. It's not just Levi Strauss that make these nowadays. It's so many people have blue jeans on their roster, but it's Levi Strauss and Jake Davis that we have to thank for. And who does not own a pair of blue jeans? I tell you, even my mom finally broke down, years and years ago. She did not grow up wearing them, but she broke down, I think, probably in her 50s, and bought a pair. So moving on is the motorcycle jacket. So the motorcycle jacket, and I love this, it's just a classic piece of Americana, but it's also harkens back to then our rebellious spirit. But let me kind of rewind here. The motorcycle jacket was commonplace, you know, through the 1800s and then, or whenever or not the 1800s, but the 1900s, early 1900s when the motorcycles came into existence. So there was a man named Irving Schott, and he was the co-founder of a company called Schott Brothers. It's still in existence today. It's in New York City. And he came along in 1928 and he updated the motorcycle jacket, which to that point had just been buttons up the front. And he came along with a zipper, and he came along with the asymmetrical placement, so it was then very easy for the motorcyclists to lean over their bikes and not have the buttons, you know, cut into their body. So it was an immediate success, an overnight success, and Harley Davidson, which was in existence in 1928, they started selling the very first motorcycle jackets that Irving had created, and that was called the Perfecto. They were mostly brown at that point, and they didn't turn into the cult classic that it is today until the 1950s. I think it was 1953 when Marlon Brando starred in a movie called The Wild One, and he was the leader of a motorcycle gang, and he sported the classic black jacket, and that's what instantly, you know, catapulted this into an iconic status. And I wear mine, I mean, when we were in San Francisco, I think I wore it practically nonstop, but I wear mine any chance that I get. So the iconic motorcycle jacket. And then moving along, we have the humble, t-shirt. Oh, okay. Oh, sorry, I don't know what that was, but, so we have the humble t-shirt, and this was kind of an interesting story because this came to be because in the 1800s, men would wear this one-piece underwear. It was called Union Street, and it was red, typically red flannel, and it had the back flap on the pocket. You'll see a lot of movies and cartoons that, you know, kind of characterize this, the lumberjack with the flap on the back of his one-piece underwear. But workers really adapted the one-piece into their day-to-day outfits, and but to keep cool, like the miners or the stevedores that were working in hot environments, they decided to cut it in half, which they did. So once it was split up, the t-shirt then began to evolve. And it really picked up steam when the U.S. Navy put this into their day-to-day uniform, because the U.S. Navy employed many bachelors, young single men that didn't have any sewing skills. And the t-shirt, as we know, they don't have any buttons, and so no needle and thread was required, no sewing skills, you know, to sew that button back on. So the U.S. Navy was like, yeah, let's give our servicemen this. So this became part of the naval uniform, and there again, they put it underneath their uniform, and then when they were in hot environments, then they could strip off their, you know, their layers, and then still be appropriate in the t-shirt. And it wasn't long before the U.S. Army caught wind of this, and then they put it into their uniform as well, and this was right about the time of World War I, so they sent all the servicemen, you know, tens of thousands of men over to Europe with their uniforms, and they loved it so much that when they came back after the war, they just put it into day-to-day use, and it's really stayed in existence until then in its form of a lot of, you know, different colors, and there's a lot of different varieties, and all ages wear them now, you know, from toddlers up until, you know, great-grandparents. But just one more fact, in the 1950s, Disney came along, and they loved the idea that they could actually take Mickey Mouse, or they could put Donald Duck, and they could actually emblazon it on the t-shirt. So that's how graphic tees came into being, which is kind of cool. And so you see a lot of graphic tees nowadays. So, moving along, we have two more items, and one that I really love, and I have owned a pair of Frye boots since I was in high school. What I wore back then were what they're famous for, and that's the harness boot, which is instead of the buckle, so they'll have the harness here, and then they have a ring instead of, I have a buckle here. These are the Veronicas, but anyway, so the harness boot really came into being in the 1960s and are still very iconic today. But Fry Boot Company came into being in the 1800s. I believe it was 1873 when John Fry opened up his shop in Marlborough, Massachusetts. And at one point, Fry boots were the lead sellers, or they sold the most boots worldwide, I think in the late 1800s. But they're still very iconic, a cult status here today with their harness boot. These are, as I said, these are the Veronicas. And then one more that I love to wear, and this is the conch belt, or the concho belt, and this is very symbolic of the Southwest and harkens back to our Native American Indian, who were wonderful craftsmen. And what they would do, they would take silver dollars and they would hammer them out, and the finished product looked like a conch or a seashell, and that's where we get the name concho. But they would string it together. Sometimes it would be jewelry, but they would string it together to make belts, and then it would go on some leather, and then we have the beautiful concho belt. So those are my 6 items that are on my list as far as iconic Americana that depict American classic style, my favorite. Let me know in the comments below. We can hang up YouTube, but let me know in the comments below what your favorite style is, and let me know what you think of this video. Thanks so much for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.